think I would do better if I had entrance music, and an introduction to come in and get Mark Ramsey to do on the screen some sort of fast. Yeah, it is. I mean, exactly. Some kind of fast scene changes things like you see at the wrestling. So at the wrestling matches. So anyway, I just think I would probably do better if I had some kind of build up.
You better be able to follow it up.
It better follow up after the build up. That's the danger, isn't it? So today we're going to have a slightly different kind of lesson today. It's going to be a little more informal. We're going to cover several chapters, but if you've been following along in our reading plan, you know that we have moved through the book of Genesis, and we've now covered some of my favorite part of Genesis. The story of Joseph is just one of my all-time favorite stories. It's very detailed. It shows all the way through it. God is in details. God is in the details of our lives, even when we don't always see Him there. When we think things are going wrong, or we think that it's taking too long, or we don't see that God's hand is moving like He told us it would move. He's still working, and He's working in the details, and He's totally sovereign in our lives. So as you get started, I was going to ask first off, is there any aspect of I don't want you to tell me the story, because I'm going to talk through the story here in a minute, but if you could give me a one phrase or a one sentence of Joseph's story that really speaks to you, which part would that be? Anybody?
What they meant for evil, God meant for good.
What they meant for evil, God meant for good. We're actually not going to move all the way to that point of the story today, but that's at the very end. They got a little fearful when Jacob died, that now here comes the retribution, right? So that's an interesting take on it. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. Anybody else?
When they left him alone.
Okay.
He was abandoned.
Okay. Dropped him in a pit.
When he cries, when he sees him for the first time.
Yeah.
The whole story is very emotional to me, but you could just tell he had forgiven him.
And that's what I was going to say, the
He was
forgiveness
just
of
so
it.
glad to see that they were okay and everything.
Okay. Well, Joseph is born into a house of, when he's born, he is the 10th or 11th boy born into this family. I've known people with 3 or 4 boys, and how crazy a household can be with that. I can't imagine a household of 11 boys. And then later comes Benjamin. Who was Joseph's mama? Rachel. Rachel and Benjamin were the only 2 boys that Rachel bore Jacob. Now, it's interesting that you've got 12 boys. They have 4 different moms. There's two wives and 2 handmaidens involved there. And Rachel, of course, was Jacob's favorite. He worked for 14 years to get her from Laban. She was his favorite. Kind of, if you follow the family tree, the family history, it seems like they're playing favorites is a problem in this family. That's a generational curse they need to take care of. Isaac had his favorite, Jacob had his favorite wife, and we know eventually that Joseph is a favorite son. He's very special to Jacob. He's born in Jacob's older age. He's born and bore to him from his favorite wife, and he's a very special young man to him. In fact, to the point that he even gives him a special gift, which was what? A coat of many colors that his daddy made for him, not his mama. Okay, so there's different.
That's the song that comes to
That's the code. That's the one that comes to mind because that's the story that Dolly wrote the song about. So Daddy gives him a coat or a robe of many colors. Unless you look in some translations of the same words that are translated robe of colors and so on. Later in some of the prophets, those same words are translated robe of long sleeves. So whether or not, it doesn't really matter, but it would change all of our children's stories if we suddenly changed it to robe of long sleeves rather than robe of many colors. That would just mess everything up. But it was still a very special gift. It's a very special gift given to them. So Joseph, first off, he has dreams, right? He has these 2 dreams that he tells his brothers that one day you're going to bow down to me, right? So that didn't go over well when one of the babies of the family are telling them you're going to be bowing to me, because in that culture it was always about age. The oldest was always the most special and on down the line. Well, he's saying, you're going to bow to me. That didn't go over well. And then later he even has a dream where even the parentals are going to be bowing down to him, and that even makes Jacob mad. So they hate him. He's dad's favorite. He has these special dreams. He thinks he's better than them, and they hate him. And they hate him to the point that they want to kill him. And instead of killing him, Reuben, the oldest, steps up and says, let's don't kill him, let's just throw him in this pit. And Reuben's plan was to come back and get him out later and to, hopefully lay hands on him in Jesus' name and lock some sense into his head. But Reuben says, let's throw him in the pit. While Reuben's off doing his thing, he comes back. They've sold him off to the Ishmaelites. Now, who are the Ishmaelites? Cousins. Isaac is born to Abraham, but so was Ishmael. So the children of Ishmael are who he is sold to. He's sold off to cousins. They take him to Egypt and they sell him off to a guy named Potiphar. Right? Potiphar is the captain of the guard. If you move over into chapter 39, Potiphar is the captain of the guard. He buys Joseph to be working in his household, and before you know it, Joseph has shown himself as being very administratively sound and organized and runs the household really well, and Potiphar puts him in charge of the household. Everything is under his charge. Everything is under his care, except for Potiphar's wife, and she wanted to be. Right? She comes on to him, and she wants him to come lay with her, and I don't think that meant take a nap. And so he says, no, I'm not going to do it. Your husband has put me in charge of this, and I'm not going to disgrace and dishonor him by having a part of what he has kept from me. And so later she tries it again, and she grabs hold of him, and he runs out of his outer garment and runs away, and now she's got his coat, right? Not the one of many colors, by the way. It's gone. So it's hanging on the wall. It's covered in blood. That's a whole other part of the story. So she has that, and she cries rape, which is part of why it's important to never put yourself in a situation where things can be said about you that there's no witnesses. That's why, as a staff, we have our 10 Commandments that says we will not be alone in a vehicle, or won't have lunch with someone of the opposite sex, won't be alone in that situation. It's actually come into play with me with being in singles ministry where someone needed a quick ride somewhere and I couldn't do it. I can't give you a ride because it's in our 10 Commandments. I won't be in the vehicle with someone of the opposite sex that's not my wife or my daughter or related to me. So anyway, she cries rape. And it tells us in verse 19 of chapter 39, as soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, this is the way your servant treated me. It says his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners are confined, and he was there in prison. But it doesn't tell us with whom his anger is kindled against. I don't think his anger was kindled against Joseph. I think his anger was kindled against his wife. Because he's basically looking at her going, woman, I finally had somebody who was keeping this place running in tip-top shape, and now you've gone and messed it up. But I can't dishonor you, so I'm going to throw him in jail. Why do I think he was mad at his wife? Another reason, because he didn't kill Joseph. He just had him put in prison. But it tells us in the very next verse, verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Now that didn't happen in day one, right? He didn't, as soon as he show up, the prison guard captain didn't look at him and go, oh, you glow with an aura of administrative achievement. I'm going to put you in charge of all the prisoners. It took time, right? But you notice it says, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. But Joseph, he don't know that. He don't know what's coming in his way, down the road for him. He don't know what God has planned. All he knows is, well, I was a favorite son. Now I was sold into slavery. I was put in charge and I got falsely accused, and now I'm thrown into prison. Things are getting worse and worse. It seems like every time I take a step forward, I take 2 steps back. And now he's in prison, but the Lord was with him. Sometimes you ever feel that way? You ever feel like God's given you a promise, or God's made a plan, or God has shown you something He's going to do in your life, and it feels like it's never going to happen? Remember, he had that dream that those guys were going to bow down to him. By the way, he was 17 years old when they sold him into slavery. 17 years old. Now he's in prison. And it tells us that he is so well done there in prison, that so well liked by the prison guard, he's put in charge. And two very special characters are brought into the story. One guy's the chief cupbearer of Pharaoh, and the other one is the chief baker of Pharaoh. And when they're thrown into prison, I don't know what they did wrong. They just found disfavor in the eyes of Pharaoh. They're thrown into prison, right? And they're put into Joseph's care. He's like the PIC, prisoner in charge. So he's taking care of these guys. And one night, the cupbearer has a dream. And he explains the dream to Joseph. And Joseph tells him, I'll tell you what that dream means. It means in 3 days, you're going back to work. It's all good. You're and the baker, well, he's all excited about the good news that the cupbearer just got. And he says, oh, I had a dream too. And he says, well, your dream's not so favorable for you. In 3 days, you're going to die.
Ooh.
So sorry. Congratulations. So sorry. But he tells the cupbearer, please remember me when you get out. Well, what's the first line, the first sentence in chapter 41?
When 2 full years had passed.
When 2 full years had passed. Hey, cupbearer, would you remember me? Sure, I'll remember you. Little side note, he doesn't remember him. And 2 full years passed. But then Pharaoh himself has a dream. And Pharaoh dreams about some fat cows and some lean cows. And the lean cows come along and they eat the fat cows. You all know the story? And he's like, well, I don't know what this is all about. So the cupbearer then has a moment, and he goes, I remember a guy who can interpret dreams. So they go get Joseph and they bring him, and he interprets a dream and says, well, what the fat cows mean is we're going to have 7 years of plenty. There's going to be so much harvest, we're going to have to store it away because we don't know what we're going to do with it. But following that is going to be 7 lean years, 7 years of famine. They're going to be so bad, we're going to totally forget about the first 7 years of plenty. So Pharaoh, you need to be able to put stuff away and be organized through that so that when the 7 famine years get here, we're able to control it. So Pharaoh says, okay, we'll do that. In fact, let's let you do that. So they bring Joseph out of the prison. Can you, just picture that. Now he found favor. He's a slave who found favor in Potiphar's eyes. Potiphar's wife messed it up, so he had to go to prison. He's a slave who finds favor so he's a criminal, and he's a slave who finds favor in the eyes of the prison guards who put him in charge of the prison. And now Pharaoh is making him come out and prepare them, help them be prepared. He's like the minister of agriculture. Right? They bring him out and they say, we need you to prepare for this famine, so you do what you know is good to do. So he does. It tells us in chapter 41, verse 46, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He was 30 years old. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and the earth produced abundantly, and he gathered, and he soared, and he got ready. So it's been 13 years from the time he was sold until he is put in place as the guy taking care of getting ready for the minister of agriculture, as we called it earlier. 13 years. Be careful when you expect God to move quickly in your life. Because I haven't seen in my experience and in my study of the Word where God said, I'm going to do this for you, and it happened the next week. Right? I haven't seen where God said, I'm going to do this for you, and in a month later it happens. Abraham, it was 25 years from the time he was promised a son until the time Isaac was born. 25 years. It's been 13 years for Joseph. He's finally out of, I would say he was probably pardoned at that point, right? So he's no longer a criminal. He's no longer a slave. He's now in place to be doing this for the Pharaoh, to do this for all the land of Egypt. You know, Egypt is the grandest, most powerful nation in the world at this point. He ends up as second in command. Only Pharaoh holds more power in the world than Joseph. He's been brought up. And then, lo and behold, he was right. Those 7 years of famine hit, and it's all over the place, even in the land of Canaan, where some brothers and their families are living. So Daddy Israel says, you all need to get yourselves on down to Egypt. I hear they've got some stuff stored up. Go down there and get us some stuff. So they show up, and they step up in front of the man who's in charge of selling the grain, who's in charge of taking care of the people during this famine, and they step right up in front of their brother. And we know it's about 20 years. Because it was 13 years since he came to work for Pharaoh. He was sold. 13 years later, he goes into work for Pharaoh. There was at least 7 years of the good stuff, good times, right? And so 7 and 13 is 20. So it's at least 20 years, if not 21 or 22. We don't know how far into the famine we are when the boys show up.
I thought we were 2 years into it.
Into the famine?
I thought he said they were 2 years.
Maybe they were. If that's the case, we're 22 years into it, since he's separated from them. What's important here is to know that they stood up in front of their brother. He recognized them, but they didn't recognize him. Hebrew culture, they probably got a beard. Egyptian culture, they're clean shaven, right? He's wearing all this Egyptian, makeup and headdresses and all this. They just didn't recognize him. So he tells them that he asks them some questions and wants to know if his dad's their dad is still alive, wants to know if they have any more brothers. What are they going to say? Do you have any other brothers? Well, I'm one, but are they going to remember me? Well, we have one that's back at the home place with Dad, and then we have one that he's no longer with us. Right? So he gives them what they need, and he sends them on their way. And before he sends them on their way, he puts their money back into the pouches. So they get a little further away, and they open them, and they see that the money's still there. And now they're freaking out because they're afraid they're going to get thrown in prison for trying to steal. Oh, by the way, when they left, he kept one of them. Simeon got held back because he said, I'm going to give you some right now to kind of get you started, but I'm not giving you the rest of what you're asking for and the rest of what you need unless you bring that baby brother that you're talking about. So they've been sent home to get Benjamin, and as collateral, they keep Simeon. So they come home and they explain to Dad what's going on, and Dad says, ain't no way. Benjamin is not going to Egypt with you. I had 2 sons by Rachel. She died, by the way, in childbirth with Benjamin. So he's already lost the favorite wife. Now he's not going to give up the only other remnant he has left to her because Joseph is supposedly dead. Well, Judah steps in and says, if we go back and we don't have him, number 1, we won't get Simeon back. Number 2, he's already told us he won't even show us his face. We're not going to get an audience with him if we don't go back with Benjamin. So time passes. They're not willing to do it. Now they've run out of food again. And Dad says, all right, you all probably got to go down there. And Judah says, you've already heard we can't go. What's the matter with you, old man? You not listening? We can't go unless we take Benjamin with us. And Judah says something very profound. I'll take care of it. I'll make sure he gets back. And you know the story. They go back. Joseph shows up. He cries when he sees Benjamin. He has to leave the room. He sees Benjamin and he's so overcome. He just can't handle it anymore. He leaves the room. He cries. He weeps alone. He washes his face. He comes back and he starts doing business with them. And he sends them on their way again. And then he puts the money back in their pouches again. And he hides a silver cup in Benjamin's stuff. So he sends the guards out after him. They're chasing them down, and they accuse them. One of you has stolen from him. And he said, Judah speaks up, says, no way. None of us would have done that. And let it be counted to whoever it is. If you find something that doesn't belong to us, that it belongs to him, if you find it, that person's responsible for it, not the rest of us. Let us go. So they search. And lo and behold, right there in Benjamin's, because Joseph, he set it up really good. He sets it, and there's the silver cup, and now Judah is beside himself, tearing his clothes. He's all upset, and he finally stands up before Joseph when they get back, and he says, "Listen, our father will basically die if you keep this boy. Keep me instead." Serious foreshadowing right there, because Jesus comes from the line of Judah. So we have our first substitutionary atonement moment where Judah says, "Don't keep him, take me instead, let him go back to our father." So at this point, he's still. We're coming to the part of the story that I like, that really gets my attention. I don't know about y'all. They're going to have a feast, and they're sitting down to eat, and they've brought them all in together. And actually, I missed that. Wait a minute. Did I get it out of order? Anyway, at the feast, if I might be a little bit out of order, but at the feast, they're sitting there, and it is they're sitting from oldest to youngest. And they're looking at each other amazed that this Egyptian put them in order from oldest to youngest. At some point, the wheels have got to start turning, right? What in the world's going on? And finally, when Joseph decides it's time to tell them who he is, he sends everybody else out of the room except for his brothers and himself, and he reveals himself. And that's when they nearly have a come apart, because they know they are in serious trouble. But Joseph says, "Don't worry about it." But those times when they came and they were looking for food and they were looking to buy grain, it tells us in chapter 42, verse 6, it says, "And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground." That dream came true.
Yeah.
And again, when they came back the second time, chapter 43, verse 26, when Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him to present the present that they had with them and bowed down to him on the ground. The dream again came true. So now Joseph has revealed himself to them, and he tells them who he is. And here's what he says in verse 4. So Joseph said to his brothers, chapter 45, verse 4. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near, and he said, "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years." Well, there you go, honey. There it was. Right there. 2 years. These 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which they will be neither plowing nor harvest, and God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. It was not you who sent me here, but God. God is so active in the details of our lives. He is. I've told you this over and over and over. If you keep God active in the details of your life, if you keep him and his will for your life in the forefront of making your minor decisions, then the major ones will fall into place. God is in the details. I told you today's lesson is going to be a little different because now I wanted to give you some personal testimony of the verse 8 that says, "So it was not you who sent me here, but God." You all know I do hospital visits. And I'm not real crazy about it, right? It's not one of my favorite things to do. Been doing it for 7 years now. It's still a struggle. It's easier now than it was 7 years ago, but I don't really enjoy it. Every once in a while, though, there's a time when I walk away feeling blessed rather than just feeling like I was there and struggling all the way through it. But in the story I'm going to tell you, I'm changing names, okay, for the sake of the innocent, and for the sake of HIPAA laws and those kind of things. So the story is true, but the names have been changed, all right? So Joseph told his brothers you didn't send me here, God did. Well, this past Thursday, what you don't know is, or you may know this, I have our pastoral care department has a ministry assistant, Shay's mama, who is very good at her job and does not make mistakes. But she's the one who hands me the cards and says, here's your group. And I had a visit this week where Sherry didn't send me there. God did. It was really a pretty, so bear with me, see if I can get these details right for you. So we received an email around the staff earlier in the week that so-and-so, we're going to call her Michelle, is having some complications, some issues with her pregnancy, and that she was going to be delivering the child, okay? And that she was going to be in the hospital. So when I went and I picked up my cards and I see her name on there, I knew that I was supposed to go see her because, you know, I'd already received the email earlier in the week. So I get my little stuff together and I go out and as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, you know, I know this family. And I don't think this is her name. I don't think her name is Michelle. I think her name is Melissa. So I actually scratch out her name on top of the card and write the correct name on top. But I'm a little concerned because there's a chance, though I know this family and I know her dad, there's a chance that she might have an older sister I don't know about. So I stopped at the information desk on the way in and I asked for Melissa's room number. And they said, I don't have a Melissa. But I said, okay. But, you know, have you ever tried to get a room number of someone at a hospital and you don't know the name? They're not going to give that information up, right? But I had the last name. I said, it's Melissa Collins. And she said, I don't have a Melissa Collins. I said, do you have a Michelle? They said, sure do. And the room number was the same as I had on my card. I said, okay, I was wrong. I guess maybe there's an older sister. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go see Michelle instead of Melissa because I thought the name was wrong. So I go, when was the last time you went and visited somebody in baby ward? You gotta jump through some hoops, don't you?
Yes.
You're not just gonna walk in there.
Nope.
Babies are getting stolen, you know, that kind of stuff. So so you got to jump through some hoops. We got one nurse who works in a baby ward in here. So you had to go to the desk. You got to give them your name. You got to tell them specifically who you're going to visit. They print you out a little doohickey, and then you end up even having to check yourself in and out as you go. So I get up to the correct floor of where I'm going, and I walk in, and the lady says, you know, check yourself in. So I did that, and I walked over. And there was her room right next to us. I opened the door, and lo and behold, the young lady in there, I don't recognize her. So, must be an older sister, right? So, I walk in and I introduce myself. Hi, I'm Keenan from Gardendale First Baptist. And she gives me a look. Okay, she said, okay. If you've ever been doing many hospital visits, when you walk in, if there is an hospital employee sitting in the corner, really paying you no attention, you know you're in a room where that person's not allowed to be left alone. Okay, I've had a few situations like that where you come in and I think the official term for that is suicide watch. Okay, so my mind is starting to spin because I don't recognize her. She's given, which I'm not supposed to, right? Evidently it was an older sister or something, but she gives me a look like I have no idea who you are or what church you're talking about. And there's somebody in the corner. So I said, I know your dad. I know Paul. And she looks at me and said, my dad's not Paul. I said, okay. And I gave her that look. I went,
How can I get out of here?
sure?
And then you call Shay.
I said,
What the heck?
well, yeah, that's part of the story that's coming back. So I said, okay. Now, let me pause it here for 1 second. Her dad's not Paul. We're getting dumbfounded look. Back up. As I was walking in from the car, the young lady who I thought I was going to see and I have a mutual friend. So I texted them. How's she doing? Is she still in the hospital? No response. That's important for the story. So let's go back up. I'm now talking to her. I'm saying, okay, so your dad, do you have is there other sides of the Collins family that you would know whose dad's name is Paul? And she said, no, not really. Okay, did you just have a baby? She said, no. She said, and this is why I felt like I could tell you this part of the story. She said, I'm actually waiting for a psych room. So she's in a different part of the building that is specific to mothers and babies. I thought I was going to see a mother and baby with that name, but that's not her. You with me? And she's waiting on a psych room. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, well, evidently, here's where I think I did not drop the ball. I hope I didn't drop it at all, but here's where I feel like I said, and again, this story is about God and her, not me, okay? But I looked at her and I said, well, maybe God wanted me to come see you today, because I have a card with your name on it, which is actually the wrong name, okay? Because I do know for a fact, and I find out a little later when I leave the room and the text finally comes in and she confirms for me I was going to see who I thought I was going to see, and that the name that I thought should have been Melissa instead of Michelle should have been Melissa instead of Michelle. But I've got Michelle's name on a card. Sherry went on vacation the day before. She called and checked for a room number the day before and wrote down a card for me to go visit Michelle Collins, when it should have been Melissa Collins. Okay? By the way, Melissa, the real one, isn't even in the hospital yet. Are y'all tracking with me?
Yeah.
I am standing face to face with a young lady God has sent me to see.
Yes.
And I'm going, oh no, don't mess this up. You know?
That gives me chills.
It gave me chills just talking about it. So I said, all right, evidently, God wanted me to come see you today. And she said, I'll be honest with you, I was crying about 30 minutes ago. And we talked for just a moment, and I prayed with her. She said, and I don't know, again, all I know is she was waiting on a psych bed. Don't know any reason, for any other reason why she was there. I don't know I have my suspicions. But she said, I've just got some hard decisions to make. So I was able to talk with her for a moment and pray with her and I remember specifically praying that God would be so clear to her that it would be as if he was standing here at the foot of her bed talking to her face to face. I don't know anything else about her. I left her my card. She said she was moving back to the Birmingham area and said she's going to be looking for a church. She is from the Baptist faith. But I don't know anything else. Other than when I walked away from that, who but God could have orchestrated that? Where Sherry, who doesn't make mistakes, when I was talking to the mutual friend, she said, well, that is her middle name. But who would know that, right? I mean, it's not, when you look it up in our database, it's the name that is there is Melissa. It's not Michelle.
How ironic that they have the
Same
same last name.
last name. So Sherry writes technically the wrong name on a card.
And the room number.
And she called and got the room number. But what's the chances? Listen, she's in the ward I expected to find her.
Exactly.
With the same name I'm looking for.
And not having a baby.
Not having a baby.
Which is weird. Why
And-
would they put her in there? I mean, that was my thing. Is when
You
you
see
walked
what
in,
I'm-
you would immediately go, wait a minute, you're not pregnant.
Yeah.
Or
You
what's going on?
see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it was a God moment. When I walked out, I had to go out and sit down. I talked to a friend before I left the ward, and then when I left the ward, I went and sat down. And I was like, what just happened? So, if you could pray for Michelle. Now, God knows her real name, but He knows who you're talking about. I don't know what was going on in her life that she needed to be put on a psych hold. Right? I've kept that card. You know, there was no point in turning it back in because it was the wrong name. And the other one isn't even in the hospital yet. So, and that's what the other one. When our mutual friend, I said, "Well, do I need to go visit her?" And she said, "She's not in the hospital yet." You know, there was a miscommunication in the email that came out asking for prayer. She wasn't going in then. It's just that this is how far along she is, and there are some issues going on, and so I'm like, well, you know, so Sherry didn't send me to that room in that hospital. God did. How many of you can look back over the course of your life and in hindsight see how God orchestrated every step of the way to put you exactly where you needed to be at that exact moment? Don't ever let me hear you talk about coincidence. There is no such thing. God is completely in control. In fact, it tells us in Psalm chapter 37, verse 23, the steps of a man are established by the Lord when he delights in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be cast headlong, for the Lord upholds his hand. Let me just tell you, this was not one of those Thursdays that I despised hospital visits when they were over. This one was like, that was really cool. You know, and I'm sitting and talking to George about it later because you know, he's another hospital visitor, and he's like the premier hospital visitor. And I was like, you know, here's the funny thing. We probably wouldn't have been able to see her in the psych ward. I wouldn't be surprised, and I can't confirm this, but this is just how God works. I wouldn't be surprised within the next hour or two she was transferred to the psych ward after she and I had a moment to talk. It's crazy what God can do. But He just orders our steps and leaves everything exactly where it needs to be for all the pins to fall in place. I just wanted to share that with you all today. As I read through the story of Joseph this week and thought about how God was so in control of his life, I wanted to bring encouragement to you all that God is still in control of our lives like He was Joseph's. Now, we got to be willing to be patient and wait on His timing. 22 years or so, 20 years we'll say, somewhere between 20 and 22 was the first time that dream that God gave him was fulfilled when the brothers bowed before him. He doesn't work fast, but He works perfectly in His timing. So that's all I have for you today. We're going to finish a little early, but I just want you to dwell on that again. If you think of Michelle this week, and when God brings this story to your mind, lift her up. I don't know the decisions she's trying to make. I pray that one day she shows up here because I gave her my card, and that one day I come back to face with her. Probably wouldn't recognize her if I did, but she can and maybe she would give me permission to tell you that this is her. You know, that would be cool. But God's got us all in His hands, and He's working us all for what He has for us.
You said was between her and God, but that could have been between you and God, because you would have never seen that had you not been willing. Or
Kelly, let me tell you some more of the being willing part. I don't like to go visit new moms and babies. It's awkward. People aren't sick.
So you don't like to visit anybody in the hospital, but especially moms.
But especially moms and babies. People aren't sick. There's usually a room full of people, and it's just odd. It's like, okay, thanks for coming to see me. It's just I've had moms not get off the phone, you know, because they're not sick, so they feel good. They're hang on, yeah. I mean, that's what they do. Yeah, and I'm talking, okay, and then we're hanging up the phone. So I'm like, it's just awkward. So a lot of times I skip new mamas and babies, but I knew this name, remember? Or I thought I did. If it's somebody I know who has a baby, that's one thing. It's the ones I don't know, because it's like you got some strange man coming to your room. You're kind of in a vulnerable position, and you know you don't really need, because you knock. Come in, and they really didn't mean it. You know what I'm saying? because they're nursing or something, and they're so used to the nurses knocking. Y'all got to get a different knock. All right, we need a different knock than the nurses and stuff. So they knock and they walk
Nobody
in.
will let you in. No.
So it's like, come on in. And then one time I opened the door and I said, it's Keenan from the curtain is pulled, which is always a blessing. So the curtain's pulled, and I said, it's Keenan from Gardendale First Baptist. She said, come on in. So I walked on in, and she was nursing her baby. And I'm like, why did you tell me to come in? I know it's natural, but I don't need to see it. I was like, okay. And I stepped back out, and to make it even more awkward, her husband walked in just a minute later. And I'm like, this is great. So I don't go see new mamas and babies unless I know the name.
What you do is you peek the.
No, there's no peeking.
Now, you tell them, I'm gonna walk out in the hall, and when you're done.
Yeah, well, that's usually what happens. I just step out. Well, we're praying for y'all. We'll see you later. You know. So anyway, if you're on Facebook, sorry about all this. This was a little crazy. But if you have anything that you need to ask or any questions or prayer requests, just put those on our comments. We'll catch up with you later in the week, and we'll see you back here next week. So anyway, that was an amazing